Biographical Bytes from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories number 44 for mid-May 2025. John W. Jack Merriam and Dream Garden. Welcome to the 44th episode of Biographical Bytes from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories. Laurel Hill West is an active and historic cemetery in Bala, Wynnewood, Pennsylvania. I am Dr. Joe Lex, retired professor of emergency medicine from Temple University, volunteer tour guide, and volunteer podcaster. I'm recording this on May 10th of 2025. Laurel Hill West opened in 1869 across the river from its sister cemetery, Laurel Hill East in Philadelphia. It's more than twice as big as Laurel Hill East. It has a totally different feel, a strikingly different population. Laurel Hill East is a Victorian cemetery that's associated with the Civil War. Laurel Hill West is more of an Edwardian cemetery that's associated with the Great War. Now, like Laurel Hill East, it is open 365 days a year, and now from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. There's plenty of parking at the business office just off Belmont Avenue, or at the conservatory and the bell tower. If you enter from Belmont, follow the road past the second gate with the white line in the middle. Another possibility, just come in while you're walking the Wynnewood Trail. This May 2025 podcast is about Philadelphia businessman and philanthropist John W. Jack Merriam, developer of Oxford Valley Mall, owner of Maybrook Castle in Wynnewood, namesake for the Merriam Theater on Broad Street, and owner of the spectacular glass mosaic Dream Garden, located in the lobby of the Curtis Building on Washington Square. Along the way, I will also talk about some other works of Maxfield Parrish and Louis Comfort Tiffany, builder of Maybrook, Henry Clay Gibson and his daughter May, and the state of public art in Philadelphia. Let's get started. John W. Jack Merriam and the Dream Garden. As I've mentioned before, I am not a native Philadelphian. I've only been here since 1986. But during that nearly 4-decade period, I've watched 3 major confrontations develop over Philadelphia's claim to major works of art. Most recently, in 2012, I watched with fear and trepidation as an estimated $25 billion worth of 900 pieces of artwork stealthily made its way from its suburban home in Marion along Lapsley Lane. It's about a mile from where I live. Lapsley Lane is named for Joseph Lapsley, buried at Laurel Hill East. That artwork moved to the Franklin Parkway, but when I visited its new location, I reluctantly admitted they got it right. Despite breaking the man's will, the Barnes Foundation did an excellent job of carrying on the mission of its quirky patent medicine salesman founder. I did my residency in emergency medicine at Jefferson from 1986 to 1989. That's just after they'd moved the Thomas Eakins painting, The Gross Clinic, to Alumni Hall from College Hall, where it had lived since its debut at the 1876 centennial celebration. But then in 2006, the Jefferson Board of Directors declared they were not art conservators. They were going to sell this Aikens masterpiece to the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., and the Crystal Bridges Museum in Arkansas for $68 million. Aikens had sold the portrait to them for $200. Philadelphia art and history connoisseurs sat up and took notice, and they scrambled to save the Gross Clinic for Philadelphia, where it belonged. Arts groups came together and quickly raised $30 million to buy the portrait. It was to be shared with the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. In fact, PAFA had to sell another of its Aikens paintings to raise the cash, the Cello Player, featuring Rudolph Hennig, who's buried at Laurel Hill West. If you go to PMA now, you can see Gross Clinic and Agnew Clinic opposite each other. You can also check out the video cast I've done about Aikens subjects who are buried at Laurel Hill. The first time I saw attempted Philadelphia art removal was in July 1998. It was an unnamed buyer. It turned out it was casino magnate Steve Wynn, who purchased the only collaboration ever made between master illustrator Maxfield Parrish and master craftsman Louis Comfort Tiffany, a sprawling multi-ton masterpiece of more than 100,000 pieces of colored glass called Dream Garden. It had dwelled quietly in the lobby of the Curtis Building since 1915. It was passed daily by hundreds of Philadelphians who were only vaguely aware of the masterpiece before them. If you've never visited Dream Garden and you're local, maybe you should just stop listening to the podcast right now and head over to the lobby of the Curtis Building at 6th and Walnut. You may at first think it's sort of an understated experience until you realize what you're looking at. It's 15 feet tall, 49 feet long. It's a mural made of small chips of glass. Some of these chips of glass are smaller than your fingernails. There are more than 100,000 fragments of iridescence that shimmer before your eyes. In May 1999, the Cummings Stained Glass Studios Incorporated carried out a conservation estimate and put the number of pieces of glass at closer to 1 million. Tiffany called this type of glass fevriel. It's an old Saxon word, means handmade. Some of the glass is actually backed with gold leaf or silver leaf, and this adds to its flash. Now, Louis Comfort Tiffany's father, Charles Louis Tiffany, founded a jewelry store in 1837. That's the year after Laurel Hill East was founded. Tiffany and Company in New York City rapidly gained the reputation of a respectable, high-quality business. Charles Louis Tiffany is credited with introducing the 6-prong Tiffany setting engagement ring and the instantly recognizable Tiffany blue gift box. When Charles died in 1902, his company was capitalized at more than $2 million and was acknowledged as the most prominent jewelry store in North America. His son, Louis Comfort Tiffany, Charles Louis, L-E-W-I-S, and son, Louis, L-O-U-I-S, Comfort Tiffany, was born in New York City in 1848. He attended Pennsylvania Military Academy in Chester, Pennsylvania. Now we know it as Widener University. Louis decided to make his own glassware and jewelry rather than just selling that of others. So he incorporated the Tiffany Glass Company in 1885. It became Tiffany Studios in 1900. It was in 1892 when he built his own furnace for molting glass. Tiffany's first commercially produced glass lamps date from about 1895. At its peak, Tiffany employed more than 300 artisans in glass. Cyrus H.K. Curtis, owner and publisher of Curtis Publishing Company, had taken a whole city block for his company's building. The printing presses were in the basement, the offices were on upper floors. I talked about him at length in a much earlier episode of All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 16, the Saturday Evening Post. Curtis is interred at Laurel Hill West, as is his architect of choice, Edgar Vigoure's Sealer. The initial plan was for a large painting in the entrance hallway. About 1,000 square feet, there were no supporting poles to disturb the view. Fate dictated otherwise. They tried really hard to put a painting in there. In 1908, Philadelphia native and PAFA graduate Edwin Austin Abbey was approached about doing a 13-foot by 50-foot canvas, similar to what he'd been doing at the state capitol in Harrisburg. Abbey was paid £50,000 at a time when a 5-bedroom house cost $4,000. After he did his research, he opted for the subject, the Grove of Academe, an appropriate topic for a mural in a publishing house. Curtis was publishing, of course, the Saturday Evening Post and Ladies' Home Journal, among other popular periodicals. Now, Curtis's daughter, Mary Louise Curtis, married Dutch immigrant Edward Bach, B-O-K, who served as editor of the Ladies' Home Journal and as Cyrus Curtis's right-hand man. It was Bach who took responsibility for decorating the Curtis building. Before Edward Abbey could start his work, he died unexpectedly in 1911. He was 59 years old. He was buried in London, which is where he was living when he died. Now, in case you're curious, Red Rose Girl Violet Oakley got the Capitol Building Commission after Abbey died. You can hear about that in Biographical Bytes from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories number 11, Henrietta Cousins and the Red Rose Girls. After Abbey's death, Edward Bach approached another American expat painter, John Singer Sargent, who also lived in London. He actually shared studio space with Edward Abbey. Sargent turned down the commission. Next on Bach's list, another local artist, Howard Pyle, a much-loved teacher at Drexel University, mentor to the Red Rose Girls. Pyle died in November of 1911. He was only 58 years old. This sounded like a project that might be snake-bit. 5 more offers were made and rejected, until Louis-Maurice Boutet de Monval, a French illustrator of children's books, agreed to sign up. And then he died in 1913. He was 62 years old. Bach now decided on the mosaic. He knew that Tiffany would do the craft work, but he wanted somebody else to do the design. Maxfield Parrish has several relatives buried at Laurel Hill East, including Lieutenant Dilwyn Parrish Starr. I talked about him just last month in the Killing Fields of France episode. Dilwyn Parrish, Helen Longstreth Parrish. A lot of parishes buried at Laurel Hill East. He was already working in the Curtis building. He was installing 18 murals in the ladies' dining room on one of the upper floors. Now, Parrish turned down the initial offer to take over that massive space on the first floor. But he eventually changed his mind. He handed in a design. It was 3 feet by 9 feet. And Bach paid him $2,000. It was called Dream Garden. Despite losing the design commission, Louis Comfort Tiffany agreed to manufacture the mosaic, and he'd have it finished by Christmas of 1915 for the sum of $40,000. Now, creating Parrish's color palette proved to be a major challenge, especially the rich cobalt blues and those glowing yellows and oranges that Parrish loved to use. Unlike many stained glass studios, Tiffany tried to avoid painting on the glass whenever possible. He wanted to make the color as part of the structure of the glass, and he experimented with various metallic oxides and fumes in the glass blowing. In the process of the glass blowing, he created more than 260 different tones and colors of glass, which he was constantly comparing to the colors that had been laid down by Parrish. Neither man was very happy with the other's work. There was a lot of bad blood between the two. But in the months before its final installation at the Curtis Building, more than 7,000 people visited the Tiffany studio in Corona, New York, to follow the project's progress. This work, Dream Garden, took 30 artisans more than 6 months to assemble. It weighed more than 4 tons, and it was transported to Philadelphia in 20 separate shipments. The city was invited to this mosaic's unveiling through a full-page 6 ad of the Philadelphia Evening Ledger. Quote, "It was the most appropriate that the masterpiece of Maxfield Parrish, a Philadelphian, should find its home in this city. Today in the entrance hall of the Curtis Building is a mural decoration called The Dream Garden by Mr. Parrish, rendered in Favreal glass, 21 feet in height by 49 feet in length. That height is off by 6 feet, by the way. By Louis Comfort Tiffany of New York. The Curtis Publishing Company invites Philadelphians and visitors to the city to view the Dream Garden. On every business day, guides in the entrance hall will be glad to give further information that may be helpful in the appreciation of this achievement by Mr. Parrish and Mr. Tiffany." End quote. Cyrus Curtis was 65 years old at the time Dream Garden was dedicated. Now, the scene Dream Garden would be familiar to anyone who knew the work of Maxfield Parrish. His illustrations had been decorating calendars and magazine covers for years. Even if the name is familiar, you can't think of one of his works, look one up. As soon as you see it, you'll go, "Oh yeah, I know his work." It's almost instantly recognizable. The Rare Book Room at the Logan Square Library, there's a Maxfield Parrish hanging on a wall that I just looked up and saw it. I said, there's a Maxfield Parrish painting, but it was instantly recognizable because of the colors, that cobalt blue and that orange yellow that he specialized in. Tiffany described the final product as follows, quote, "The most remarkable and beautiful effect is secured when different light play upon this completed mosaic. The mountains recede, the trees and foliage stand out distinctly, and as the light changes, purple shadows creep slowly from the base of the mountain to its top. The canyons and waterfalls, thickets and flowers, all tell their story and interpret Mr. Parrish's dream." Parrish refused to explain himself. It's a dream garden, a genuine dream, and not a real thing in it, and nothing will induce me to talk about it. To write about my work in any way would give me exactly the same modest sensation as walking down Chestnut Street at noon stark naked. Parrish did not even attend the unveiling or the dedication. He even suspected Edward Bach's motives in putting such a work of art in a commercial building. He said, "Tiffany and I are only instruments who helped carry out the dream of a mastermind. Marble columns support the mural. Goldfish swim in a marble bath at its base." One stunned critic said, "Mere words are only aggravating in describing this amazing picture." The only work of art that comes close to Dream Garden is the mosaic glass curtain in Mexico City's National Theater. That was constructed just before Dream Garden. It served as a template. But the Mexico curtain was not based on a Maxfield Parrish painting, with its dazzling deep blues and its stark bright yellows. The lobby of the Curtis Building glows with white marble, including some benches with red cushions where you can sit and ponder this work. Philadelphians discover this gem mostly on their own, and then they share it with special friends and visitors. It quietly existed in one of the busiest sections of town for more than 8 decades, until the building's owners decided to sell it. The first that most Philadelphians heard about this deal was July 22nd, 1998. Page 1 headline in the Inquirer shouts, "Curtis Building mural is sold," with a subheadline, "The buyer plans to remove the huge glass mosaic. The loss is seen as a blow to the city." End quote. An Inquirer editorial stated, "To remove the Dream Garden would be an act of sacrilege, equivalent to selling off one of the Calder fountains on Benjamin Franklin Parkway, or perhaps tearing out the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel for sale to the highest bidder. Actually, I'm only aware of one Calder fountain on Benjamin Franklin Parkway. There's another Calder statue. There's the Shakespeare statue in front of the library, but that's not a fountain. The owner of this mosaic that had been sold was identified as the estate of John W. Merriam, a property developer who had died 4 years earlier in 1994. John Merriam was born in Chicago in 1908. He studied at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School and received a bachelor's degree in 1931 and a master's degree the following year. While at Penn, he captained a water polo team. He was All-American for 3 years. All-American water polo. He was also a member of the golf and swimming teams. Merriam, who people called Jack, was in the real estate development business. He married Ruth Levy. They had no children. They lived together for many, many years. Ruth died at 81 in 1988. Well, Jack waited a decent 4 years, and he remarried, this time Elizabeth C. Lockyer, who had served as his secretary since 1947. She had been divorced for decades herself. But Jack did not change his will when wife number one died. This led to problems a few years later when he died. Jack Merriam was a very wealthy man. He was a successful real estate developer whose failures were almost as legendary as his successes. His most ambitious project was a domed sports center, trade center, hotel complex at Penn's Landing. And it went up in smoke when voters approved a bond issue that built Veterans Stadium. Another unsuccessful initiative, his proposal to convert the Curtis Building into a museum dedicated to American painting and sculpture that would feature works that were borrowed from other museums. Well, this proposal was declined by both the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and was thus quietly abandoned. Despite Merriam's membership in the Art Alliance, the Art Museum, and PAFA, the plan did not come to fruition. But his failures were heavily outpaced by his successes. His career started with property developers Joseph F. and Riddle H. Greenberg, for whom he bought, sold, and developed office, retail, and commercial properties. In 1934, he helped set up the Federal Housing Association, which provided financing for large and small housing projects. He also worked with the A&P Food Company to develop models for suburban supermarkets. One of his early independent successes was in the 1930s with Jericho Manor, a 137-unit garden apartment project in Jenkintown. During World War II, Jack helped train Navy frogmen in underwater maneuvers. During the Korean conflict, he designed and manufactured the coffins in which bodies of dead U.S. soldiers were returned home. And for 40 years, Jack Merritt owned and managed the Buffalo Weaving and Belting Company. It was in 1953 that he developed the 220-unit Thomas Wynne Apartments in Wynnewood. He was probably best known as the developer of Cedarbrook Hill Apartments. That's a 985-unit high-rise complex in Wyncote, and of Cedarbrook Mall, the first enclosed shopping center in eastern Pennsylvania. He also made millions as one of the three developers of the Oxford Valley Mall in Bucks County. Philadelphia Mayor Ed Rendell once said of Merriam, "His good heart knows no bounds. He wrote a $10,000 check out of the blue after hearing me speak. In the 8 years since, he's never asked me for one favor, not even a parking spot. It's extraordinary." Other friends commented that despite his ruthless businessman persona, Jack was a relaxed and low-key guy with a calm voice and a slow, articulate manner, quote, more suggestive of an English teacher than a businessman, end quote. He was a small, dapper man with a liking for cigars and a reputation for never turning away from a good fight. For instance, in 1982, Jack argued that the tax assessments on Cedarbrook Hill apartments were too high. He paid, under protest, but the money went into escrow rather than into the municipal budgets, while the case wound its way through the courts. January 1993, the state Supreme Court settled the matter in Mr. Merriam's favor, a huge loss for the township and a $1 million victory for Jack. Jack was a founder of the Philadelphia College of Performing Arts, which later became the University of the Arts. He was the man responsible for negotiating the purchase of the Shubert Theater on South Broad Street, which was used as a performance hall and classrooms for many, many years. Philadelphia's Sam Shubert Theater at 250 South Broad Street had been built by the surviving Shubert brothers in 1918. It was one of more than a dozen self-named theaters around the country. I talked about the Shubert brothers and their battle with the theatrical syndicate extensively in All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 14, On With the Show. The theater was built on the grounds of the demolished Horticultural Hall, which I talked about at All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 60, the segment on Elizabeth Duane Gillespie and the Centennial Celebration. If you go to the theater today, that marble staircase is saved from the old Horticultural Hall. Now, the Shubert was used as the tryout theater for shows that passed through on their way to Broadway. If you were fortunate enough to live in Philadelphia in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, you could see many classics in their formative stages. Girl Crazy, Funny Face, Annie Get Your Gun, Kiss Me Kate, Brigadoon, Guys and Dolls, Paint Your Wagon, Of Thee I Sing, Mr. Wonderful, The Most Happy Fella, Bells Are Ringing, The Music Man, and Gypsy all started in Philadelphia at the Shubert before they went on to New York. Among the stars who trod the boards, Barrymore, John Barrymore in Hamlet, Al Jolson, Gertrude Lawrence, the Marx Brothers, Helen Hayes, Tallulah Bankhead, Laurence Olivier, Katharine Hepburn, and Ethel Merman. On Wednesday, December 11th, 1991, the University of the Arts announced a name change for the Shubert. It was to become the Merriam Theater, named after philanthropist and businessman Jack Merriam. You can learn a lot more about the Shubert Merriam Theater from the book or the podcast Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia. Peter Schmitz has talked about the Merriam Theater at length. In March 1922, the theater name changed again, this time to the Miller Theater. It's in honor of Allen B. Miller, a founding board member of the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts. Jack Merriam lived in a main-line castle which had been built in Wynnewood in 1881. Many nouveau riche Philadelphians were building Gilded-era faux Gothic castles outside the city. Also in Wynnewood was Isaac Clothier's Ballitour, which is now the Armenian Church of St. Sahag and St. Mesrab. In 1881, real estate developer Henry Clay Gibson, son of Western Pennsylvania distiller named John Gibson, purchased 67 acres of the former Robert Owen Jones estate next to the railroad tracks in Wynnewood and engaged the architectural firm of George W. and William T. Hewitt to build him a castle. He called the property Maybrook. He named it after his daughter Mary, whom Henry called May, and a small brook that ran through the property. Gibson brought over English stonemasons to construct the 35-room mansion. It has 20,000 square feet and a 72-foot tower. Although the exterior was traditional mainline Gothic, the interior was very modern. Several hot air furnaces, hot running water in 1881. The garden was huge. It required 6 gardeners in the winter, 25 in the summer. They had 2 of every variety of native tree on the property, except the maples. They had the maples taken out. They were too messy. Gibson stocked the castle with his favorite artwork. The style that he preferred was naturalism of mid-19th century French artists of the Barbizon school. He left more than 100 paintings to Paffa when he died in 1891 and was interred at Laurel Hill East in Section W. He bequeathed Maybrook to its namesake, 22-year-old Mary May Klett Gibson. May spent the rest of her life on the property. She had a carriage house built in 1902, which she later converted into a studio. She's the one who commissioned the 60-foot-long, 50-foot-tall ballroom with the cathedral ceilings and arched windows. The cloistered court attached to the ballroom featured stained glass windows by Violet Oakley, who later received the commission for the murals at the State Capitol building in Harrisburg after Abby died. I talked about Violet extensively in Biographical Bytes from Bala, Laurel Hill Stories number 11, Henrietta Cousins and the Red Rose Girls. May never married, but she was a wonderful neighbor. She invited the neighboring community to swim in the pond in the summer and to skate on it in the winter. She even built a slope so she could have sledding parties in the snow. During the Great War, she hosted about 60 women volunteers who stayed at Maybrook. They lived there and learned to care for livestock. During World War II, many children displaced by the London Blitz were made comfortable at Maybrook. She became a self-taught botanist horticulturalist. She never married, never had children, and she was only 10 years old when her father died of measles in 1894. Now here's where it gets confusing. Mary Clett Gibson is who I just told you about. However, there is another Mary Clett Gibson. She would be the aunt of the one I just told you about. In other words, a daughter of John Howard Gibson, granddaughter of Henry Clay Gibson. This Mary Clett Gibson married Dr. John Norman Henry in 1909. They purchased a 95-acre farm in Gladwin. There they raised 5 children together. Mary became an active field botanist and went on more than 100 botanical expeditions over the next 40 years. John became director of public health for the city of Philadelphia. One of her sisters, Adeline Pepper Gibson, became a volunteer nurse in France during the Great War, but she died there of influenza. She is buried at Laurel Hill East, however. One of Mary Henry's far-flung adventures led her to British Columbia and northwest Canada, which she visited several times in the 1930s. In 1935, she was accompanied on one of those trips by a Canadian government topographer who was planning the Alcanna Highway. He named a mountain for her. Mount Mary Henry is near mile marker 393 on the Alaska Highway. Her local legacy is the Henry Foundation for Botanical Research, a 50-acre nonprofit botanical garden along Rock Creek on Stony Lane in Gladwin. It's just off Route 23. She developed hundreds of hybrids from the seeds and the cuttings she brought back from her trips. She wrote more than 100 published articles on horticulture and botany. Now, when Dr. Henry died in 1938, he was initially buried at Laurel Hill East. But 29 years later, Mary changed her mind, and his body was removed to St. Christopher's Church Cemetery in Gladwin, and that is where Mary Henry and Dr. Henry are now buried. So, they're not at Laurel Hill anymore. I will stop their fascinating story. Let's go back to May Gibson. May sold a small parcel of the land in the 1940s. It was going to be used as a parking lot for the Wynnewood Train Station. It was in 1950 that she sold 10 acres in the southeast corner of the property to Jack Merriam. That's what he used to build that 220-unit Thomas Wynne Apartments. She sold the remainder of the property to Merriam in 1956, and he moved into the castle with his wife Ruth, while May took up residence in the carriage house, and that's where she lived for the rest of her life. During his long lifetime, Jack Merriam amassed a fortune worth $95 million. In 1988, he developed a throat problem, which required surgery, but damaged his vocal cords and left him voiceless. His faithful secretary since 1947, Betty Lockyer, who did uncountable hours of research to find someone who would help Jack to recover his voice. In gratitude, he made a $2 million gift to the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary. Jack's longtime love of the arts was reflected in his last will. When Ruth died, Jack rewrote his will to leave generous endowments to the University of Pennsylvania, Bryn Mawr College, University of the Arts, and Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. But under Pennsylvania law, that will was nullified when he remarried in 1992. Well, he realized this, and in the spring of 1994, he had a date with his lawyers to rewrite his will. But that very morning, he felt sick, and he was taken to Lankenau Hospital, and he died on April 6th. He never made it to the lawyers to change the will. That means that his widow, Betty, formerly his secretary, was the sole heir. But Betty Lockyer Merriam was a good-natured woman who did what she had been doing for decades. She carried out the wishes of her boss, who had since become her husband. And after meeting with representatives from the 4 other organizations, it was decided that Betty would keep 41% of the estate. Of the remaining 59%, Penn would receive 40%. The other 3 institutions would receive 20% each. Each 10% is worth roughly $10 million. Although Merriam sold the Curtis Building in 1984, he retained ownership of Dream Garden. Now, when the estate sold Dream Garden without fanfare in 1998, it forced the city to deal with the potential loss of a major work of art. The initially anonymous purchaser stepped forward. It was casino magnate and Penn graduate Steve Wynn. He planned to disassemble the masterpiece and ship it to one of his Las Vegas properties, the Bellagio, on which he had already spent an estimated $285 million on artwork. When Wynn realized the storm that he had inadvertently created, he withdrew his bid. And Mayor Ed Rendell asked the Philadelphia Historical Commission to certify Dream Garden as a historic object, the first in the city's history. "There are some things you just cannot sell," said Rendell. Wynn apologized for causing a stir. He explained that he assumed that this was a simple purchase from a private estate sale. After all, the mosaic was privately owned. It was in a private building. Technically, this does not qualify as public art. Art experts then stepped in. They explained that any attempt to move the mosaic would result in irreparable damage. And then, to add to the swirl of confusion, Betty Merriam died before everything could be ironed out. This made the 4 institutions named by Betty Merriam as the co-executors of the estate. Dream Garden was declared the first historic object in Philadelphia. That's before the Liberty Bell, before Independence Hall, before Benjamin Franklin's grave. Dream Garden would stay in Philadelphia. But no one stepped forward to assume its care and maintenance. Finally, 2001, Pew Charitable Trust. I talked about the Pews extensively in an earlier episode of Biographical Bytes from Bala. But the Pew Charitable Trust agreed to provide $3.5 million to buy out the interest of the owner's heirs. The 3 remaining beneficiaries transferred the mural to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts with the agreement that it would stay in the lobby of the Curtis Building, where it has been for nearly a century. PAFA also established the John W. Merriam Society to recognize individuals who include PAFA in their estate plans. Now, when I found out Jack Merriam died with a net worth of nearly $100 million, I expected him to have a large mausoleum or at least a fancifully carved Tiffany headstone. Much to my surprise, John Merriam and his 2 wives are buried under a simple ground-level bronze marker in the Garden of Remembrance at Laurel Hill West. It's literally just a few feet inside the Belmont Avenue gate. Dream Garden, in the lobby of the Curtis Building, continues to enchant and delight thousands of visitors who seek it out each year or who stumble on it while taking a shortcut through the Curtis Building. If you want to see more work by Louis Comfort Tiffany, visit the Charles Hosmer Morse Museum of American Art in Winter Park, Florida. It houses the world's most comprehensive collection of the works of L.C. Tiffany, including Tiffany jewelry, pottery, paintings, art glass, leaded glass windows, lamps, and the Tiffany Chapel he designed for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, which is bigger than Dream Garden. While glass is the most significant medium in which Tiffany worked, he designed, fabricated, or sold everything that made up an interior, including furniture, textiles, and wall coverings. You can find other examples of his work around Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and PAFA, as well as the Cathedral Basilica of St. Peter and Paul, Old St. Joseph's Church in Willings Alley, the First Unitarian Church at 21st and Chestnut, Grace Baptist Church on West 8th Avenue. The Tiffany Studios even designed funerary works. Across the street from the Hera Gothic Castle at Laurel Hill West is a simple but elegant mausoleum built for the William Suplee family. There's a small bronze plaque affixed to the base indicating that it's from the Tiffany Studios. Nearly a dozen Tiffany-designed windows grace other mausoleums, and a handful of headstones, tablet stones, and ledger stones were designed and carved by Tiffany Studios. Dream Garden has been assured its place in the history of American art, a massive mosaic resulting from the melding of two artistic geniuses, Maxfield Parrish and Louis Comfort Tiffany. It is not possible to estimate how much it would cost to duplicate Dream Garden today. Tiffany wrote his own words for the mosaic's unveiling. I trust it may stand in years to come as something worthy that has been produced for the benefit of mankind and may serve as an incentive to carry even farther the true mission of the mosaic. So the next time you have guests in town, you know right where to take them, and you know the story to tell them about Dream Garden. In the June 2025 episode of All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 75, I plan to cover some Laurel Hill people with titles, hereditary or otherwise. Several years ago, I talked about Princess Olga Demidov-Trubetskoy Stover, who has a cenotaph at Laurel Hill East. There's another cenotaph at East that belongs to Baron James Ivan Michael von Sutka, who claimed to be an Olympic champion pistol shot, and Baron Ettore Fontana, who's an unwelcome guest in the mausoleum of RMS Titanic victim William Dulles. I also hope to tell you about Laurel Hill West's Countess Brockenhuis von Lowenheim, an opera singer, and the Marquis d'Eskens de Fronois. Mid-June 2025, Biographical Bytes from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories. It's Milton Cooper Work, a recognized American master of the card games whist and bridge, and founding member of the American Contact Bridge League of Hall of Fame. He was also a famed cricketer and was present at the creation of the Golf Association of Philadelphia. For upcoming activities and tours, check out the website, laurelhillphl.com/events. I have some tours coming up. I've got a tour on May 24th, Accessible Sacred Spaces and Storied Places tour at Laurel Hill West. That means it is on the paved path only, no stairs, no steep hills. There's a new tour coming up June 1st called Medical Meanderings. That's also at West. Talk about Dr. David Hayes Agnew, Dr. Chevalier Jackson, Dr. Catherine Rotan Drinker, and the Radium Girls, Dr. Francis Xavier Durkham, and his care of President Wilson when he had the stroke. Many, many more. Should be a fun tour. It's a brand new one. Another not a brand new one, but a fairly new tour on June 14th. I'm sharing it this year. That's Flag Day. It's also the day before Father's Day. It's called This Sporting Life. We are going to visit the graves of 2 members of Baseball Hall of Fame, 2 members of Tennis Hall of Fame, the Ice Hockey Hall of Fame, college football, golf. It's a long walk around the cemetery, but you will have a ball. Sarah Hamill is going to help me with this, and you're going to get your steps in on that day. That's for sure, but it is a terrific tour. I remind you that the book is coming out later this year. All Bones Considered, 52 Laurel Hill Women. Several author events are already arranged at local libraries. I'll be doing something at the cemetery also. All Bones Considered and Biographical Bytes from Bala are mostly researched, written, narrated, and produced by me, Joe Lex, retired professor of emergency medicine from Temple University, volunteer tour guide and podcaster for both cemeteries. You can reach me through my email, jrlexjr1947 at gmail.com. The theme song, Names at Peace, is by local artist James Harrow. Maybe I will see you on a tour. Stay safe, stay well. Bibliography is coming up next. Most of the information about John W. Merriam came from newspaper articles in the 1990s and the early 2000s. As far as Maybrook, the first description was in the Philadelphia Times, Sunday, May 1st, 1887, page 11. Beautiful, beautiful lithograph of the castle, the mainline Gothic, as I was explaining it. The ad for the opening of the Dream Garden is the Evening Public Ledger, Monday, January 24th, 1916, page 6. There's an article called From Parlor Print to Museum, The Art of Maxfield Parrish. Author is Coy L. Ludwig. Art Journal, Winter, 1965-66, Volume 25, Number 2, pages 143 to 146. There's an article by Kim Sayet, S-A-J-E-T, that I found online, and I don't know what the source is. It's called From Grove to Garden, The Making of the Dream Garden Mosaic. And like I say, Kim Sayet, or Sayet, I guess it's pronounced, but I don't know what journal it's from. Pages 43 to 51. Another article that I looked at was called Keeping Charity and Charitable Trust Law, the Barnes Foundation and the Case for Consideration of Public Interest in Administration of Charitable Trusts, by Ilana H. Eisenstein, the University of Pennsylvania Law Review, May 2003, Volume 151, Number 5, pages 1747 to 1786. I think that's it. Everything else was from newspaper articles. All right, again, thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay well, stay above ground.